Well, she bragged in December of 2013 that the US had invested 5 billion, a billion, B as in boy, okay, in Ukraine's aspirations to join the West. Whoa. What happened on February 22nd, 2014 in Kiev? Well, there was a putsch, there was a coup. It was the most blatant coup in the history of mankind. Putschists took over. Vladimir Putin had to come back from Sochi, where he was at the Winter Olympics, and take stock and say, my God, okay, the fascists have taken over. NATO has supported them. What am I going to do about our only ice-free naval port in Russia? Well, certainly I'm not going to let that become part of NATO. And the Crimeans themselves don't want that. Well, let's ask the Crimeans what they feel. They had a plebiscite, overwhelmingly approved to rejoin Russia. Well, there was no hesitation on the part of Nuland and the other neocons to say, aha, see, the Russians are invading Ukraine, and sanctions were proposed by the United States. Now, our European brothers and sisters were smart enough to know what the game was, okay? And what they said was, well, wait a second, we don't really need to do the sanctions because we know what went on in Kiev. We know who was responsible for the coup, and we don't like these fascists anyway. And then the Malaysian airliner MH17 was shot down over Ukraine. John Kerry got up and he said, we know who did it. We have imagery. We know exactly when the plane was shot down, and we know where it was shot, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? US intelligence does know that. It wasn't the Russians. And proof of that is coming now with a trial in Holland, in the Netherlands, where people are being asked to find out, well, did the US ever share that imagery with you? And the answer is embarrassingly no. So let me see where we are here in terms of time. Let me kind of finish up here by saying, well, what do we do?
Keep going, Ray. You got plenty of time.
I do. Okay, I saw you get your guitar there. I was wondering if you're going to put the hook on me.
You've got the floor. We love hearing you. We've got all the time in the world.
Okay. Well, if you fast forward now from MH17 when it was shot down, and then of course the U.S. took advantage of laying some real sanctions on Western Europe, on Eastern Europe as well. I mean, let's say you're an Italian farmer who raises apples and sells most of them to Russia. Well, these things really hurt the West Europeans. Did they hurt the US? Not so much. This is just an indication of how the West Europeans still, 75 years after the war, okay, the war for which I was alive during, pardon my grammar, 75 years after, are still wedded to the notion that they have to follow Washington's diktat, even if it means hurting their own economies, hurting their own selves, okay? Now, if you fast forward to the election in 2016, we have the latest, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but I am going to maybe do a little clip. I have a clip that I'd like to introduce now, if it works. And it's a 2-minute session between Representative Adam Schiff, who most of you know, and myself. What happened was I was at this, well, let the thing run and then I'll comment more on it. Thank you very much.
I don't hear the audio.
whether
Neither do I.
Assange was a known participant or, as the Russians would describe, useful idiot. That we will hopefully find out.
Do you need to just play it from the start?
And the conclusions of the intelligence.
You have every Senator Schiff, my name is Ray McGovern. I served in CIA under 7 presidents and 5 directors.
Thank you very much.
We have a little alumni group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we've been following this issue very closely. One of our members is the former technical director of NSA. I'm interested in 1 week ago when the president said this, I don't want to misquote him. The conclusions of the intelligence community with respect to Russian hacking were not conclusive regarding WikiLeaks. In other words, there's a big gap between alleged Russian hacking and WikiLeaks. The intelligence community does not know how or if that information, to the degree it exists, got to WikiLeaks. Now, you assert as flat fact that Russia did this. Do you know more than Obama?
I would never claim to know more than Obama. I think he's a brilliant man.
It's a very serious
No,
question.
no, it's a serious question. I have every confidence in the intelligence of the Russian hacking of both the DNC as well as John Podesta.
James Clapper is a convicted.
You asked me a question. You want to hear the answer?
I will.
And while I can't go into the classified information, I have every confidence that the Russians used WikiLeaks, whether Julian Assange was a known participant or, as the Russians would describe, a useful idiot. That we will hopefully find out. But I don't have any question on the conclusions of the intelligence.
You have every confidence but no evidence. Is that right?
No, I can't share the evidence with you.
No.
Congressman,
That's
Paul Jordan,
bogus.
former
That's
Director
bogus.
of Security and Intelligence. We always refer to it as the SSCI. The intelligence community, we use sissy as a term of derision.
Is
So
that
please,
right?
please don't do that.
Yep, I'm back. Can you turn me back on? Am I back on?
You're back on. Maybe you could summarize. It was hard to hear the audio of that.
Sure. Well, this was a situation at Hillary Clinton's and John Podesta's old think tank, so to speak, the Center for American Progress or something like that. And 5 days, that is on the 25th, 5 days after the inauguration of Donald Trump, on the 25th of January, 2017, Schiff came to give a major address to the faithful, okay? Now, McGovern was there. That's what I like to do, be there and raise my hand and ask a question. Well, I had already been noticed to be an unfavorable questioner earlier, so I wasn't recognized. I went up after Schiff spoke, and I had no idea that the microphone was still on, much less the video, but I challenged him. I said, well, look, now you said that it's a reality, that it's truth, that it's ground truth, that Russia hacked and gave that information from the DNC. This is important now. I'm just talking about the legend that Russian hacked the DNC and gave those emails to Julian Assange. Now, the reality is that the President of the United States, 2 days before he left office, got up at a press conference. We think it was because of the memo we gave him 2 days previous, which said, look, would you clear this thing up? How did WikiLeaks get these DNC emails? If you can prove that it was the Russians, would you please do that and lay aside all this uncertainty? So on the 18th of January, 2017, Obama said this. He said, the conclusions of the intelligence community with respect to how WikiLeaks got the DNC emails is inconclusive. Oh, wait a second, end quote. He's saying that the conclusions of the intelligence community are inconclusive. This is less than 2 weeks after he was briefed up and down by the 3 charlatans that headed the intelligence community, John Brennan, James Clapper, and James Comey, who may be indicted, by the way. In any case, Obama is saying, look, I'm a lawyer. I'm not going to lie through my teeth. I can say the Russians did it. No one can prove otherwise, probably. But I'm not going to say that there's evidence that the Russians gave it to WikiLeaks. I'll leave that hole right there, and I'll go out into the sunset and not be a confirmed liar. Well, we know the result. We know what's happened to Julian Assange. He is, well, I guess I would describe it best in recent, over the recent Lenten season and Holy Week. There was a fellow named Caiaphas, right? A fellow named Caiaphas. And he was a high priest, and he was part of the system. And when Jesus was brought out for, telling the oppressed people what was going on, the empire couldn't abide that. So as a cog in the empire, Caiaphas said, well, look, are you so stupid? Don't you realize that it's better that one man die than the whole structure, the whole system we've set up where we profit as middlemen for the empire disappear or be injured? Don't you realize it's better than one man will die? Well, that's what's happening at that kangaroo court in London. Now, the good news, and if you can put that picture back up, that would be great. The good news is something really heartening, and that is that just yesterday, a video was shown, put on the YouTube, showing that Julian Assange has another life. Here it is. He's got 2 sons. He's got a wonderful partner. Her name is Stella Morris. And the Daily Mail has this picture of them now. And it's just amazing. Let me just share you, my friend Dan Ellsberg was so moved by this video, and I encourage you all to get a hold of it on YouTube, that he wrote me this last night. He said, I was participating in a panel about Julian Assange earlier today, that is yesterday. It was the first anniversary of his unceremoniously being dragged out of the embassy, the London embassy of Ecuador. He says, it felt like a wake. It was so sad. And now suddenly, says Dan, without any warning at all, the best news I can remember receiving for years in the midst of these dark times. I cannot remember another film clip that brought me such happiness. To see that Julian has had, after all, a helpmate, a soulmate of such dedication, eloquence, and beauty, and that he is blessed with such enchanting children. And you can see him there, huh? He said, after seeing and hearing that, I'm determined to see that Julian outlived this pandemic, and I hope that his wife and his children will be able to be held in his arms, and eventually he be free. Reading this story and seeing and hearing Stella Morris, his partner, Gabriel, his first son, Max, his second son, has made me feel a very personal concern for my extended family, says Dan Ellsberg. That includes all of them. I want desperately to see them all, to see us all brought together. That's said in love. Matter of fact, Dan Ellsberg always ends his emails with "Love, Dan." He's a lover, and love is going to conquer this whole thing, even though it may not seem to be the case right now. We just finished with what I consider to be encouraging things. I.F. Stone, one of my favorite publicists, famously said, look, this is a real struggle for justice. You got to go in it with your eyes open. You have to have a sense of humor. He said, because, and this is a quote, because you're going to lose. And then you're going to lose. And then you're going to lose again until one day, someone who has fought for justice just like you is going to win. You got to be faithful to that. And lastly, I just want to talk about my friend Dan Berrigan, from whom I drew so much lessons and so much in the way of grace, I would call it. Dan, of course, was the arch protester for the Vietnam War, he and his brother, Phil. And they did this action in 1968 in this little Dorf, this little town outside of Baltimore, Catonsville. And they were wrapped up for burning draft cards, Vietnam Times, of course. And they're in this, well, the only federal building in Catonsville was the post office. So they're sitting around, all 9 of them in the post office. And Dan is ruminating, and this comes through in his memoir that he wrote. He says, I was thinking, this was a bold thing. Was this worth doing? And he said, you know, I consoled myself with the thought that, yeah, this was worth doing because it's not about whether we'll be successful. It's about letting the truth speak for itself. We need to divorce ourselves from the prospect of being successful. We just need to be faithful and let the truth speak for itself. Wow. Now, translate that now. I saw Dan for the last time in, it would have been August, no, I'm sorry, it would have been September of 2013. And we, 3 friends of mine, and I were going to Moscow to give Ed Snowden the Sam Adams Award for Integrity and Intelligence. And I talked with Dan Ellsberg before. Dan Ellsberg, of course, spent much time with Dan Berrigan in prison during Vietnam. So I went in there, and Dan, it was at Fordham where the infirmary was for Jesuits, and Dan Berrigan was frail, but he had 5 books on each one of his bed tables. He was reading all the time. And I said to Father Berrigan, I said, Father Dan, I'm going to be seeing Ed Snowden in just a couple of weeks. We're going over there to give him the Sam Adams Award. Would you have anything to say to him? And he thought, and he says, he didn't speak in a very loud voice. He says, yeah, tell him he did the right thing. I said, okay. And Dan, I was talking to Dan Ellsberg just last night. I told him I might be seeing you today. Do you have any words for him? And he said, yeah. Tell him he did the right thing too. Now, that is so simple and so profound, okay? We're called upon to do the right thing. And it may look impossible. It may look like we're never going to succeed, but we're called to do the right thing. And what I'm going to do now is just finish with a little quote from Martin Luther King, who said, of course, there is such a thing as too late. In other words, we got to summon the courage to do the right thing now. We got to figure out some way to do the right thing now. And I'd finish by quoting a person not many people know. His name was Albrecht Haushofer, okay? He was wrapped up as a dissident in Germany. He was a Geolog, a geography instructor, actually professor. And he played the game with Hitler, and then he realized quite too late that this was really evil, and he had to gather a group around him, which he did. Well, the Nazis wrapped him up and put him in a different prison from Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was hanged. Haushofer was about to be shot, okay? Now, the Nazis didn't shoot anyone or hang anyone until they had a confession. So they said, Haushofer, you give us a confession. He said, that's for the birds, no confession for me. When they picked him off the floor, having been shot, a little settle came out of his pocket, okay? A little piece of paper. It was a poem. And it said this. The title was Schuld. Those of you who know German know that means guilt. Doch bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Yes, I'm guilty, but it's not what you're thinking. Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. Ich musste schärfer Unheil nennen. I should have earlier obeyed the dictates of my conscience. I should have named evil, evil. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lang gelenkt. I put off my judgment far too long. Ich habe gewarnt, so I did warn, and he did, aber nicht genug. Genug is enough. Nicht genug und klar. So I did warn, but not enough and not clearly enough. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. And today I recognize what I was guilty of. I did warn, but not enough. Nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. The times are with us now, folks. We've been warned. There are lots of warnings out there. You all come from a very, very, very historic part of our country. You rose to the occasion back 270, whatever it was, years ago. We need you to help lead us as we face down the injustice that has prevailed in our country and throughout the world by our doing. So I've talked long enough, probably longer than I should have. It's been a pleasure being with you all. And it is Easter, of course. So I would encourage you, as my friend Dan Ellsberg does, to focus on the good news, on the new birth, on the spring, on the two new children that are in this world, who look, my Irish ancestors would say, they're the spit of their father. They look exactly like Julian. There's new life there, there's new hope. So let's focus on that. This is not synthetic joy. It's the joy of realizing that there is such a thing as spring, there is such a thing as Easter. Happy Easter to all of you. I'd be happy to take any questions or.
Yes. Ray, thank you so much. You folks will notice that in the background, in Ray's screen is, of course, Julian Assange, but right next to it is a wooden cross that is a very distinctive style invented by a certain Fernando Jort, very famous Salvadoran artist, who lived during the war years in La Palma, which is very close to the villages where I go to visit. It's a beautiful design, and it evokes the song I'm going to sing now, which is Ray's request, by the way. He asked for a couple of things that I happen to know. The first one is a little song that I know from my missionary childhood in Costa Rica, and it's called Yo tengo gozo en mi ser. And it goes, Yo tengo gozo, tengo gozo, tengo gozo. Gozo tengo gozo en mi ser, es como ríos de agua viva, ríos de agua viva, ríos de agua viva en mi ser. I have joy, joy, joy in my heart. It's like rivers of living water in my heart or in my being, en mi ser. That's a lovely little Easter thought for you all. And the other song that Ray asked for is something from Carlos Mejia Godoy, who is one of two songwriter brothers who were the soundtrack for the Sandinista Revolution. This is part of a mass called the Nicaraguan Campesino Mass, Nicaraguan Farmers Mass, and it's a retelling of the Mass in people's voice. And this says, "You are the God of the poor, the God human and simple, the God who sweats in the street with us, the God with the sunburned face. That's why I talk to you just as my people talk to you, because you are the workers' God, you are the workers, the people's Christ. Vos sos el Dios de los pobres." If you YouTube Dean Stevens' Vos sos el Dios, you will find a nice recording of this song with a montage that somebody I don't know put up of photographs from Nicaragua. I'll also mention that it has gotten 260,000 hits, which most of what I have on YouTube gets 30. Vos sos el Dios de los pobres, el Dios humano y sencillo, el Dios que suda en la calle, el Dios de rostro curtido. Por eso es que te hablo yo, así como habla mi pueblo, porque sos el Dios obrero, el Cristo trabajador. Voy de la mano con mi gente, luchas en el campo, en la ciudad, haces fila ya en el campamento para que te paguen tu jornal. O con la espada allá en el parque con Eusebio, Pancho y Juan José. Hasta protestas por el sirope cuando no te deja mucha miel. Vos sos el Dios de los pobres, el Dios humano y sencillo, el Dios que suda en la calle, el Dios de rostro curtido. Por eso es que te hablo yo, así como habla mi pueblo, porque sos el Dios obrero, el Cristo trabajador. Yo te he visto en una pulpería, instalado en un caramanchel. Te he visto vendiendo lotería sin que te avergüence ese papel. Yo te he visto en las gasolineras, chequeando las llantas de un camión, hasta patrullando carreteras con guantes de cuero y overol. Vos sos el Dios de los pobres, el Dios humano y sencillo, el Dios que suda en la calle, el Dios de rostro curtido. Por eso es que te hablo yo, así como habla mi pueblo, porque sos el Dios obrero, el Cristo trabajador. Por eso es que te hablo yo, así como habla mi pueblo, porque sos el Dios obrero, el Cristo trabajador. Thank you, everybody, and I send that out in special to one person who's in the audience. It's Jose Alemán, who was the Consul General of El Salvador, former Consul General, and there he is, right there on my screen. Hello, Jose. Let's see if I can unmute you so you can say hello. Oh, he's gone. Oh, well, I tried. So I want to give it back to you, Ray, and let's see if there's any questions. We could do a sort of a hand raising, see if somebody wants to ask Ray a question.
Muchas gracias for the song. Applause. Felicidades.
So I can't find the hand raising function. If you want to ask a question, use the chat to indicate it and it will unmute people.
I see Clint and Judith on the screen. That's on. Let me start with Clint. Go ahead, Clint. I'm going to unmute you.
No, I was just waving my hand saying you could wave it on video. I don't have a special question.
Oh, no question. How about Judith? There you are, Judith. Hi. Wait. Okay, go ahead, Judith.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, Ray, I wanted to go back to your time in Moscow. What were you doing there, first of all?
Well, I was the chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch in the early 70s, and we were working on intelligence that could support arms control agreements with the Soviets. Our job was to discern were the Soviets really interested, and if they were interested, could we conclude an agreement that would be able to be verified? In other words, we're under Nixon now, and we're not yet to Reagan, but the slogan already was trust but verify. So we worked for years supporting the delegations, negotiating these agreements, and finally the Russians came around. Not incidentally, they came around because Kissinger was bright enough to play the Chinese off against the Russians. That's another story. In any case, in early 1972, we came together, and there were 5 agreements agreed in Moscow in May of 72. And the most important, of course, was the ABM, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which was the foundation for strategic stability until George W. Bush jettisoned it in 2001. Terrible thing to do. Anyhow, I was given the privilege of being there. The delegation came there and signed the documents. And then I was able to hang around for a while. I spent actually 3 months there in the embassy and traveling around the whole country. And it was there that I encountered the tender mercies of the KGB. Used to call me up in the middle of the night just to make sure, if they fell asleep, make sure I was still there and that kind of stuff. But more harassing than that, actually. So it was kind of remarkable that as soon as Georgy McGovern was nominated to be the Democratic candidate for president, they were taking no chances. I had the free reign of the whole country. There was nobody going to mess with me because he might be my uncle for all they knew.
That's interesting. So that was a government position you were in?
Oh yeah, I was at the embassy. Now, I was not undercover, so the Russians knew who I was. They knew I wasn't an operations guy. They knew I was an analyst, and it made sense for them, for someone like me to be there to support the embassy. The embassy offices were traveling all over the country, of course, to Leningrad in those days, St. Petersburg, Kiev, where Nixon also went. So I was able to support the embassy. It made sense to the Russians. That didn't mean they didn't surveil me up and down, but they did. But they knew who I was. They knew I was not part of the operations, part of the agency that was running operations against Moscow.
You said that they seemed to have to be sort of coaxed into or come to the conclusion of that of signing some kind of peace treaty. Wouldn't they have wanted something like that right away? I mean, having suffered as much as they did in the war, I was always assumed that they were very anxious to tie, any kind of weapons down.
Well, we're talking now 72, right? So
Right.
the war's over 45, so it's many years later. Now, after the war, of course, they were kind of worried about what the US might do with this very formidable armed forces. And I didn't mention, I don't think, in my remarks, but they were invaded not only by Poland and Lithuania and the Hanseatic League, but also the United States. Most people don't know that we did everything we could to overthrow their government in the early 20s. We even had a Quisling named Kolchak, the white general, and we invaded Russia up in north, up near Norway, and then also in the Far East. Didn't get very far, but they remember that as well. At least their history books include it. Ours do not.
Dorothy, I'm going to unmute you. You have a question? Thank you, Judith.
I wondered, thank you. I wondered if you could tell us, Ray.
I can't hear you.
Anticipation of the
Couldn't hear you. Could you start at the beginning?
the State Department folks and the people who say they were trying to fight corruption in the Ukraine.
Well, I didn't hear the first part of your question, but I think I understand the gist of it. The State Department was taken over by folks that knew better than the president what should happen. And of course, what they knew better was the Russians were a terrible threat. The Russians were terrible. Probably nobody told them, or they suppressed the memory of the coup that we orchestrated in Kiev on Moscow's doorstep on the 22nd of February, 2014. No, it was all the Russians, the Russians, the Russians. One of their advisors famously said, we have to fight the Russians in Ukraine, so we don't have to fight the Russians here. Nancy Pelosi famously said recently, all roads lead to Putin. What's that supposed to mean? So there's a large myth out there that the Russians are aggressive again. And if you trace it back into recent history, it all began after, as I pointed out, there was a close relationship in September of 2013. After the coup in Kiev, it all went downhill real quick, and that was deliberate. And I didn't say this, but should be obvious. Why was it deliberate? Well, one of the main reasons was what I call the Mickey Mat. Okay, now you know that Eisenhower used to talk about the military-industrial complex. Well, I talk about the military-industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, think tank complex. Media, why do I say media in large caps? Because it's the media that makes it possible for all this to happen. The media that's controlled by the corporations that are profiteering on tension with Russia. If you don't have an enemy, and we're including China now as a major enemy, if you don't have an enemy, it's really hard to spend more than half of your discretionary income or your discretionary budget on arms making and arms trading. And of course, we know the system. Congress people get elected by being funded by the arms dealers and arms traders. They appropriate money for more arms and more arms trading. The more arms trading is done, the Saudis and others will get it. And then those very generous and very gracious or grateful corporations put more money in the pockets of the military, industrial, intelligence, congressional, media complex. And I mean, is this a great country or not? That's how it works, okay? Let me just add one little vignette. I remember when the Pope came. He came to Washington and he spoke to Congress. And what was not noted in the press was something he said. He said, you know, the main problem is the blood-soaked arms trade. Oh, all the senators, congressmen got up and, oh yeah. And then they looked in their vest pocket to see if the latest envelope from Lockheed was there, and the one from Raytheon over here. I mean, it's giving hypocrisy a bad name. So that's how bad it is. And that's at the bottom of all this. Plus the fact that the Democrats bought into the notion that Russia was a really, really threatening place. And that fell in with the Russian interference in our election, which really didn't happen. And, you can read all about that. I'm not going to try to explain that right now, but we can prove that the Russians did not hack into the Democratic National Committee. We know it was an inside job. And we know that there is incredible sensitivity to even mentioning the name of the person, the prime candidate for the insider who did it. I'll say his name. His name is Seth Rich. And why do I say he's the prime candidate? Because Julian Assange, quite uncharacteristically, mentioned him in a way that was undeniable that he's a prime candidate. I can't say we know he did it, but it was an inside job that we can say, because we've done this forensics that Bob Mueller didn't do. You know Mueller from Whitey Bulger and all that kind of stuff. You know Mueller. Most people don't know Mueller. Most people believe the New York Times saying he's universally respected. Well, he's not among people who know his record.
Let's see if there's Judith, go
Um,
ahead.
So maybe you could go into a little more detail on that. I mean, those are things we haven't read about and don't know where we would read them. So you could tell us where we could read more about this alternative view and, tell us a little more about that. It's very interesting.
Judith, thank you so much for bringing up that point. The fact is that we're not allowed to say these things in the mainstream media. It's not that we're just not invited to appear, and what we write is completely dished or buried. But for, let's see, since late 2016, what is that? Over 3 years now, we have been looking for evidence. Vladimir Putin had to come back from Sochi, where he was at the Winter Olympics, and take stock and say, my God, okay, the fascists have taken over. NATO has supported them. What am I hearing another voice here? Our only ice-free naval port. I'm hearing another voice. Shall I just speak over it? Well, Judith, just to continue, we've done a lot of work on this. We've been blessed in Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity with count them, two former technical directors of the National Security Agency. They know what happens on the web, and they know how to detect whether there's been a hack or whether it's been a leak. And you can read this at consortiumnews.com, or you can read it at raymcgovern.com, my website.
Actually, to people on the list, if we can't see you and you want to ask a question, use the chat feature down the bottom, the toolbar, type in a question just saying you want to get recognized and we'll recognize you.
Dean, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello. Am I on?
You are on. At least I can hear you.
Okay. My question is, how can we make the mass media democratic, and what would be the role of geeks who are employed by the media presently or in the future?
This is the crucial question, of course. If we knew how to do it, we'd be doing it. It's incredibly hard. I have been blackballed from at least 3 radio interviewers that I know, major ones, have lost their jobs because they asked me because they interviewed me. Now, this is about 10 years ago when Iraq was going pretty full strength. So, this is really up to those of us who know the media, those who kind of figure out, well, is Tucker Carlson the only person that can be right, even if it's only 5% of the time, but can be very right sometimes? And how do we exploit that when he sees through these charades? Or how do we tell the American people about what's happening to Julian Assange? Now, I just checked this morning. Nobody has reported on the Star Chamber proceedings that are going on in Belmarsh Prison or outside it in the courtroom for 3-4 weeks. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, NPR, none of them are even saying word one about it. And this man is about to be, I'm afraid, infected by the virus, given the petri dish that prison represents, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. That really hurts, People should care. People should pay attention, particularly, if they don't give a rat's patootie, or if they've been deceived by the calumny, the slander against Julian Assange. Are they not concerned about First Amendment protections for the press? Don't they realize that if the U.S. succeeds in extraditing Julian Assange, every person who will be tempted to leak or to publish a leak will be so deterred, so afraid that the US will come after them, that it'll be a terribly stifling effect. So it's just one of, it's the worst thing. I'm a personal friend of Julian. I used to visit him there. Full disclosure, okay? He's about the brightest and gentlest person that I know, okay? So I feel this personally, but God, it's about the worst thing that's happened, except for the virus, over the past year, that this person has been, as of yesterday, a year, dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy and subjected to the tender mercies of people like Judge Baretzer, who resembles Caiaphas in many ways, Caiaphas being primarily interested in preserving the system. And it's far better that one man die to keep the system intact. It's I just don't know the answer to your question. I appeal to you people who know more about the media than we do to figure out some way that we can get some exposure. There has to be a way. And as things evolve here, and I'm hopeful about this, if the virus finally goes away, the evidence of those three people I mentioned before, FBI Director James Comey, CIA Director John Brennan, and the head of the National Intelligence Setup, James Clapper, well, the evidence is so clear about let's say, the crimes that they committed the end of 2016 and beginning of 2017, well, people say to me, come on, McGovern, for God's sake, are you saying that the top officials of our law enforcement and intelligence communities are a bunch of liars? And I'm saying, no, not all of them, but those three, I can prove it, okay? And when asked, well, how could that happen? I say, it was really simple. Listen, okay? Everybody expected Hillary Clinton to win, okay? Now, if she's a shoo-in, then Comey can, as he revealed in his own book, he said, and I quote, I was operating in an environment where Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period, end quote. Well, if you're operating in that environment, well, you don't care much about liberties taken with the law or people finding out how you're trying to sabotage Trump. I'm no friend of Trump, please don't mistake that. But, they didn't even hide their tracks. And so what I'm saying here is that special prosecutor in Connecticut, Bryant is his name, no, not Bryant, Durham, John Durham, he's got the evidence. So the question is, will Trump and Attorney General Barr have the guts to stand up to what has become known as the deep state? It's very real. Will they have that guts? I'm not a betting man, but I wouldn't bet that courage will prevail here. I'm afraid that the deep state will, and that's why it's up to us to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. Oh, I can't hear you.
Susan McLucas will be next asking a question.
I was wondering whether there are any dissidents among the geeks who could turn this thing around.
Well, that comes to the question of how they would get the word out, okay? Now, the last dissident, major dissident, was apparently a CIA employee. And what did he do? Well, he saw that the CIA and the NSA were cooperating in this new directorate founded by John Brennan for computer warfare. And they were developing offensive computer tools, offensive cyber tools, to wreak all kinds of havoc. Now, when I asked Bill Binney, one of our former technical directors of NSA, this Vault 7 is what it's called. What is it? He said, well, Ray, look, you know that it contains 700 million lines of code, right? I said, yeah, that sounds like a lot, Bill. And Bill says, yeah, Ray, I know you're a history major, but look, each line of code costs $25. Can you still do arithmetic? This is the kind of operation it was. Now, when that was revealed through WikiLeaks in March of 2017, all hell broke loose because one of the tools revealed was something called Marble Framework. And what did that allow the CIA to do? Allowed the CIA to break into a computer or a server, to disguise who it was that broke in, and to leave little telltale signs, little breadcrumbs. They could be in Cyrillic. They worked in 5 languages: Arabic, Persian, Chinese, Korean, and Cyrillic, Russian. Okay, that enabled them to do that. Now, what happened? Julian had that information. He revealed it on the 31st of March, 2017. Less than 2 weeks later, Mike Pompeo, then CIA director, got up before a think tank and said, WikiLeaks, or Julian Assange and his friends, are demons. Apparently, Pompeo believes in demons. He said they are running a non-state hostile intelligence agency. And that's when they got the Ecuadorians to lean really hard on Julian. About a year later, he was unceremoniously dragged out of the embassy there. So they really want to shut down WikiLeaks, or at least warn people that they can't go to WikiLeaks. Now, I don't know how they caught this one fellow who gave Fault 7 to Julian, but those were the family jewels. And I just would add that Julian, when he announced this, said that the material given him in Fault 7 was worth a little bit more than all the material that Ed Snowden revealed when he got into Hong Kong in 2013. That's a lot, folks. And it's just been the tip of the iceberg so far. So what they're worried about is whether WikiLeaks will continue to be able to do this. And if they can, if there's a secure way that people can feel that they can divulge this information for the greater good of society, they will. And WikiLeaks could be joined by public-minded spirits in other ways.
I've got a question. This is Susan McLucas.
Yes, Susan.
Hi. Do you think that part of why the Democrats wanted to blame the Russians in the first place for leaking the DNC emails about Bernie was to distract from the fact that they had been fighting against Bernie so hard?
Well, yeah, that's a good insight. I would just point out that it's pretty clear what happened here. This is probably worth rehearsing. June 12th, 2016, Julian Assange announces he has emails relating to Hillary Clinton pending publication. Whoa. Emails. Now, Julian Assange is going to publish them. What is it, June 12th? When's the convention? Starts June 25th. So the DNC had that much time to prepare for the worst. And what was the worst? The worst that somebody may have leaked, not hacked, but leaked DNC emails to Julian Assange showing that Hillary had stolen the nomination from Bernie Sanders. Did you read them? It's unmistakable. That's what they showed. And so Hillary sat around her table. I wasn't a fly on the wall, but I know how this stuff works. She sat around the table. What are we going to do about this? What if he publishes this before the convention? What if Bernie learns about, oh my God, this is terrible, okay? And somebody says, well, I know what we do. We'll blame it on the Russians. And Hillary says, it's not the Russians, it's WikiLeaks. That's okay. We hate them both. We'll say that the Russians hacked and they gave it to WikiLeaks. And Hillary looks around the table and says, anybody got a better idea? No better idea. They went with it. And if you remember, when WikiLeaks published that information on the 22nd of July, 3 days before the election, what was all the press talking about? Why did Russia hack into the DNC? John McCain, this is an act of war. How could they hack into the DNC? nothing about nothing about what the email showed in terms of stealing the nomination from Bernie. So that was the original incarnation of this story. And it got more legs the more people realized that, hey, you can blacken the Russians, we can sell, we can buy, we can develop far more arms to show that we're up to this very big challenge from Russia.
Debbie Kerr, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi. So thank you so much for coming to talk. I'm wondering two things. The first one is, how do we ever know what's true? And the second is, do you have any insight into whether the Russians are messing with elections in general?
Okay, could you repeat the second one?
Aside from the DNC email, it's thought that people from Russia are like posting fake stuff on Facebook even now. Like, how do we know if the Russians are messing with the previous and current election? Or do you think they are?
Well, Debbie, I don't think they are. And the reason is, we intelligence analysts, at least we used to depend on evidence, okay? Now, John Brennan, when he head of the CIA, testified before the Senate and said, we don't do evidence. Huh? We don't do evidence. We just assess things. We assess this, we assess that, and we assess this with high confidence. So here's the evidence. Let's talk about the Facebook postings. Those Facebook postings started well before the election and lasted even longer after the election. And what were they as a percentage of Facebook postings during that time? You got a pencil? This is what they were. 0.00000042% of all the stuff on Facebook having to do with these issues. So it was ludicrous that the New York Times would say that this really changed people's views. Just ludicrous on its face. Even Facebook testified to that effect. Now that doesn't mean that the mainstream media and most of your friends reading the mainstream media would not believe that, but it's not true. And the proof of the pudding came this way. They indicted 13 people for doing this, right? Mueller's indictment, okay? Never thought, there's all these smart lawyers, right? Never thought that the people who are running this internet research agency, what they call it in St. Petersburg, never thought that these guys would hire an American lawyer and ask for discovery, which they did. And when it came to defending what Mueller said in his investigation, that Russia did this, well, it turned out that there was no proof that Russia, as a government, as a state, there was no proof at all that Russia or Putin or any government official had anything to do with the IRA. And the judge said, wait a second. This is discovery now. You can't prove that it was the Russian government. Come back later and tell me why you can't prove that. The government said, sorry, we can't prove it. Now, just 2 weeks ago, the government said, oh, we're not going to pursue that case. We're throwing out those indictments because, for national security reasons. Those lawyers that were hired by the Russians, they're too bright. They're gonna get secrets if we proceed here. So throw it out. That's just one major prong of Mueller's investigation. That was the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, totally bogus, and Facebook can prove it. Now, the other thing, the Russian hacking, it's a little bit more difficult, but we've written scads about this. Tune into our McGovern.com or consortiumnews.com, and you can get educated on this because, that's the only way, really, and it's a sad commentary on our media that they won't even give us the time of day.
Mike Heisman's next.
Ray, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I can. Is this Mike?
Yes, thank you. One of the things I very much appreciate with your presentation is the indictment of the Democratic Party. Well, we hate Trump so much. It's like we're blinded in terms of the crimes created by the Democrats. And I thank you for your presentation. I think that's, for me, an important part of your message today. We're in the middle of not in the middle, but the coronavirus. And I know that, and he deserves, Trump deserves a lot of blame for what has happened here. Do you have any information coming from any place that would be information that most of us who are, and people here are progressives, most of us don't know about in terms of the behavior of Trump, the behavior of the government, whatever that's invisible to people like us?
Well, thanks, Mike. First part of your question, the Democrats. My father was an incredible admirer of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When he died, I remember crying, okay? I was born in the Bronx, and I used to describe this as, well, the membership in the Democratic Party and the local union was conferred at baptism. Some of you up there in Boston, we would appreciate that. So, I asked my father early on, what's the difference between Democrats and Republicans? He said, well, Democrats care about ordinary people. Now, he operated in pretty high circles. He was Chancellor of the Board of Regents of the state of New York. And he knew from firsthand experience. Now, what has happened to the Democrats? Well, first of all, I need to say what my wife always tells me I have to say, which is true, that I think Trump is the worst president the United States ever had, okay? That's what I think of Trump. And what I think of the Democrats, well, I couldn't vote. I couldn't vote for their last candidate. I voted for Jill Stein. They have lost it. They've lost the sense of the common man. And so I feel really, really badly that the party that used to represent the people, in my view, no longer does, and worse than that, is not only duplicitous, but really stupid. If you look at the impeachment thing, everyone knew how that was going to go. Anyhow, and you listen to Pelosi saying all roads lead to Putin. What the heck is that supposed to mean? So, second part of your question, Trump. I think Trump is completely incapable of doing the right thing, even if it stares him in the face. The coronavirus did stare him in the face, and it took him an unconscionably long time to stop the happy talk and stop defending the economy and caring about the real people. Now, I wrote an article recently which says, well, WikiLeaks, where were all those doctors? Where were all those specialists that knew what we were in for and knew that Trump was dissimulating, that Trump was doing happy talk and not recognizing the real question? Why couldn't they have gone to WikiLeaks with documents and said, look, this was happening. It might have given us another month. Another month might have been a couple 100,000 less victims. Why didn't they do that? Well, it's just not in their public consciousness. And if people are brave enough to even consider it, they go, oh, look what happened to Julian. And that's the reason it's happening to Julian. So there's a codicil to this, or a footnote, and that is we have to be really careful of the mainstream media. When I was writing this recent article, appeared 2 days ago, there was this ABC report, a breathless thing. It said, as long ago as November, the National Center for Military Intelligence knew all about this stuff and briefed the White House and briefed the Pentagon and November. Well, I checked that out, and of course, a few hours later, the head of that military center for military, Defense Center for Military Intelligence said, there's no such study. That's never happened. So ABC is part of the of this MICIMAT, the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Complex. Okay, you can't depend on anything they say. There is no such study. So one has to be really careful. On the other hand, there are studies that show that the intelligence community did brief this thing January, February, not November. So it's just really important to discern which axes there are to grind and who's doing it. And you just could take the major media because of the Democrats' visceral hatred. Now, hatred is not good for anything, okay? But if it creeps into the media, it's really hard for normal citizens to find out what's going on. Now, I'll say it again, we do offer an alternative here, and it's easy as hell to get. And, you know, my son who does my website, he says, Ray, he says, Dad, if you don't mention the website, I'm not gonna work on it anymore, okay? So the website, once again, is raymcgovern.com. Everything I write, or most of my speeches or my interviews, appear there. And I invite you to join me there, and also to read consortiumnews.com, a wonderful website set up by Bob Perry, a wonderful investigative journalist way back, and who died 2 years ago. So there are ways to find out. It's just that you have to really kind of look, but not, you know, people my age say, oh, I don't want to, you know, how do you get a link? Well, it's easy as pie. My grandchildren teach me how to do this sort of stuff. And, you know, it's really incumbent on people to get themselves informed. I want to just add one other thing. I do a lot of teaching at the Servant Leadership School at the Church of the Savior in Washington. And I used to cram into every course I took the Martin Luther King letter from the Birmingham City Jail. And there's one quote in there that's not very well known, but I like to leave you with this because that's the shtick, that's the raison d'etre for what I do and what my website does and what consortiumnews.com does. It's this. Martin Luther King, Dr. King was talking about injustice and lies. And he said, quote, like a boil that can never be cured unless it is uncovered with all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, so too injustice must be exposed with all the friction its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and to the...
Luis went into the hospital with coronavirus this past Friday. And he was in until Monday. He is home. He's doing fine. He's in quarantine and observation and receiving good attention from nurses who come to see him. Luis lives in Chelsea, which is a big hotspot for the virus. It's obvious. It's because all the immigrants live there who are doing the essential work in the restaurants and the grocery stores and out in the world right now needed. So we send our best wishes to Luis. Another person who was stricken with the virus is the plumber who is going to do our 4th and 5th floor sprinklers and was going to start right now, but is also in quarantine along with his family. So this is something that has hit us in a very personal way, as it has so many people. It's just everywhere, as we all know. Ray, thank you so much for bringing up Daniel Ellsberg. Do you know that Ellsberg spoke at Community Church in 1971? And that's getting to be almost 50 years ago. It would be really amazing. I don't know how he's doing, if he'd want to do a Skype with us on the 50th anniversary of his speaking at Community Church, and also the Berrigans, who spoke numerous times at the church, and more recently, Frida was with us just a couple of years ago. I want to just tell everybody about the activism that we could be doing, and I will put up the links to this, as well as to Ray's article in Consortium News and Ray's website. First one is end sanctions to Iran, against Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, and end the war on Yemen. Sign petitions and write your Congress people about those awful sanctions that are especially horrible right now. I've been reading a little bit about Cuba's stance towards the virus problem, which is that they're sending doctors all over the place, and it's just so amazing. And we need to take the example of Cuba's health care for all. The second one I will post is about initiatives on the State House to release a whole class of different prisoners in the Massachusetts jails, people awaiting trial. They need a new bail hearing. People who are elderly or immunocompromised or in have health conditions that make them very susceptible to this virus. People who are back in prison on little dipshit technical violations of their parole. Those people need to be out, and our State House needs to know about that. Call your state senator and your state rep about that, and I can tell you the names of the legislation that is being considered. The next one is get in touch with your media providers and tell them not to cover the White House press briefings, which are just a pack of incredible lies. And and the last one is free Julian Assange. Finally, oh, there's one last one I got to tell you about, because it's about this Tuesday. There is a UU mass action event. Usually it happens at Arlington Street Church, which is just 3 blocks from us. And we have a gathering where we are energized to go up to the State House and meet with our state representatives. Obviously, this gathering is not going to happen this Tuesday, but it's going to happen online. And I'm going to get to sing some songs and receive an award. I've never received an award before, but it's kind of this memorial award given for music and social action. I'm very honored to be part of this. The president of the UUA is going to speak, and several other speakers. So join us for that. There will be a link on our website as well. Sorry about all the technical glitches. Charlie, thank you so much for all your help. We spent a bunch of time this weekend doing a dry run of a Zoom meeting and figuring out how to do the YouTube. This morning we had trouble with the YouTube. We finally did get on, and there's some people watching live YouTube. We hope to be on live Facebook as well, or any other platforms we can find. This is a serious message to us, which is that this is not an inconvenience. This is a wake-up call about how we need to up our media game. There's so many opportunities to get out to the world through this stuff. Community church is in a tough budget situation right now. We depend on the income of our first floor, which is a restaurant which is closed, and the rental income stream during the virus issue is a real question for us, and so that's a tricky thing. But we really want to take advantage of every media resource that we have to turn a community church into maybe what it used to be, which was in Symphony Hall for 2,500 people. And to that, I want to just end by something that's very germane to this moment when we have Ray McGovern with us. And it's something here. It is the transcript of a talk that Henry Wallace gave to Community Church on January 21st, 1951. The talk is called March of the Common Man, Constructive or Destructive. And I just want to read the first paragraph. It's 3 sentences. It says this: increasingly since 1945, the attention of all mankind has been riveted on the continuous battle for position between the USA and the USSR, on the strenuous propaganda conflict between the communist and capitalist worlds. Unfortunately, the terrible pressing disaster implicit in this situation has prevented most of us from asking, what are the deep underlying causes which operated to bring on World Wars I and II, and which will still be operating to produce World War IV long after World War III has scarred the planet with disaster? Until we can think of these causes clearly without having our mental processes distorted by fear and hatred, both the Russians and Americans will be led into one disaster after another. That's Henry Wallace, 1951.
Wow.
One final word from Ray before we hopefully,
Yeah,
we'd like
I
to,
would just,
let's all go have lunch with Luis. Just kidding, but virtually to close. We have five more minutes before 1. Go ahead, Ray.
no, I just wanted to mention that the wonderful history book that was written by Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick has a whole chapter on Henry Wallace and how he was clearly to be the vice presidential candidate until the Democratic machine said, no, we'll put in Truman. Now, if you want to talk about earth-changing, history-changing events, it was putting Truman in there to run with FDR instead of Henry Wallace. It's an incredible story. And we'll see what happens this time, but it's very germane to what's going to happen with respect to the Democrats now. The only other thing I'll say is thank you. It's been an honor to be in the train of Dan Ellsberg and all the other people, including my friend Peter Van Buren and others. And I will say, without pretending to speak for Dan, that I'm sure, I'm morally sure, that if you asked him to speak on the anniversary of when he spoke last, he'd be happy to accommodate you. He doesn't do a lot of traveling these days, but he does do a lot of speaking. So good luck with that. And you can mention my name if it will do any good.
Maybe you can help us connect with him and we can set that up. The sooner the better, during our 100th anniversary. Again, you know, we can stay on and we can unmute everybody. You know, it's like this
Dean,
is,
Joan has a question.
Joan.
It's still,
Hi, Joan.
Hi, Joan.
It doesn't feel like it's long enough. I had several points to make, but they went right out of my head when I got unmuted. The question about media, I think, is an important one because they are so, at this point, there's a book called The New Media Monopoly. And most recently, whether it's a newspaper, a radio broadcast, or television or films, there are only 6 corporations that own all media. So sometimes you'll see that every single source says the same thing. It's like they had coffee and said, let's say Russia's evil. And it's almost currently, I think since 2014, when Russia did not invade Ukraine, it's almost like World War III is wanted by some. But I found, there was an old saying, Ray would remember from being in Moscow, that people who were in the know back then, you say, why do you know that? And the answer would be, well, you must know how to read Pravda. And I have called US fake news, that's Hillary's term, US Pravda, but that's not fair because the word Pravda, I believe, means truth. Is that right, Ray? And truth is the point. So I actually don't believe anything about Russia until I see it on RT, which interestingly is one of the things that was indicted. A very good reporter for RT was named an operative, I think 5 years after she had left the station. She now would tell us, you know, the great reporter Abby Martin. So in terms of who can you trust, not Western is my, and I personally suggest that everyone support consortium news and then you'll be much smarter.
Yes, Ray, go ahead.
Just one more little remark here. You know, I had to read Pravda and Izvestia every day when I was following the Soviet Union back in the 70s, 80s, 60s. And their propaganda was pretty ridiculous. I remember one phrase they used to use all the time. It was denigrating or condemning Volstritskие kravatiцы. Now, those of you who know Russian know that means Wall Street bloodsuckers. And I used to always say, you know, this is ridiculous. Volstritskие kravatiцы, come on, that's off the charts. Well, live and learn, live and learn. Who's behind all this stuff? That what happened in 2008? You know, who's profiting from all these new laws and legislation? Well, I'm afraid it's the Volstritskие kravatiцы and not the common people such as we.
So I'm going to unmute everybody so we can give Ray a round of applause.
So we can thank him for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, it was my honor.
Applaud artists.
Thank you, Ray.
We put in one last pitch for next Sunday. We have a phenomenal program with slowly improving Zoom technology. It's Reverend Barry Lynn, the retired director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And he happens to be joined by his good friend, our neighbor, Katie Curtis. Katie is a wonderful, world-renowned songwriter and folk singer, lives right here in Newton. And we're really honored that she's going to join us because Barry Lynn is her friend and she's willing to be with us next Sunday. So I hope we can come back and be together again on Sunday. And it's the next best thing to being right there in our auditorium, warming up those seats on a Sunday morning.
Thank you.
Else, anything to say? Hello, everybody. I hope you're staying well, staying safe.
And
Hello,
unmute
Susan,
everybody.
Lucas, David Roll, Joan, Dorothy Weitzman,
you.
Charlie and Karen. Nancy, I don't know exactly which Nancy that might be. And somebody named Noble, Dorothy Weitzman, Dave Lewitt, and Jose Alemang. And Jose, will you introduce us to your friend who's next to you?
Well, our friend and longtime Somerville resident, Mary Dean.
Oh, Mary!
Visiting
Hello,
from
Mary.
Colorado.
It's a Hail Mary.
All right. All right. And Lenny, greetings from Maine to Lenny. Can you hear me, Lenny?
Guess not.
Oops. Can you hear me now, Lenny?
Yeah, I can hear you. I've heard you all along.
Good, good.
Brunswick, Maine. And
Thank you.
so thank you all. And thanks, Ray. We're going to have you in person. And you know that, folks, Ray had already purchased a ticket on Spirit Airlines, which was the cheapest ticket. I think that's the airline that makes you swipe your card to go to the bathroom, right? Maybe we'll get you back after, when the coast is clear, and have you in person to have another maybe before our 100th anniversary is out. So
Happy to do it.
thank you again for participating.
Most welcome. Take care now. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Leah Bolton says hello. Leah Bolton, we're hoping there'll be a recording like, oh, hi outside people, that there might be a record. Oh, bye. There goes Leah.
There,
Hi,
there
Len.
will not be a recording for one simple reason. Unless Charlie pushed the button, I didn't push the record button.
I trust him in all things, so if it's possible,
Oh,
I was checking on
Charlie, did you
Facebook.
push the record
he had
button?
done it the first
A lot
time.
of people were not able to get on both YouTube and Zoom. People had trouble getting on.
Oh, it's on YouTube, so that
I
we
tried-
can, yes.
That
Yes.
crashed my browser. I ended
The
up.
very beginning didn't get on YouTube, but it's on YouTube. So
Good.
that's my next task is we'll have it live because it's on YouTube. And I can go on the controls and turn it into just one of our YouTube files.
Ask
Great.
Charlie and you shall receive.
I want to congratulate you, Dean, on your award tomorrow.
Yeah.
I won't be able to be there.
Tuesday.
I know of a fairly promising project to try to get some college dorms for prisoners to get out to. I'm going to work on that. And Dean, and there's going to be a good meeting of the SEPs on Wednesday. But let me also tell you that I somehow got stuck in a way that other people might have. It said the meeting was in progress and I couldn't get on. So then I went on my iPad, which meant I had twice what was going on, which was convenient for me. And I hope it didn't cause any problem. But anyway, that's what I thought I'd tell you.
Well, Charlie, are you there? There was a bug at the beginning.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You might not be able to hear me either.
I can hear
Okay,
you.
thank you. Thanks very much.
Mute Dean.
Anybody hear me?
Mute us, Charlie? I didn't mute
I'm here. It gets so bad when I'm just muted everybody.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
So
Well,
hopefully
the YouTube live part is very interesting, and it's recorded there. It's committed to memory, and we can I can go back and keep it, save it. So we have that recorded, and Ray was fabulous. What a character, huh?
Yes.
Now I'd like to find out who Noble is.
Oh, it's Noble Larson. I know him.
Noble. Noble, I'm going to
hi,
unmute
Dean.
you. Noble, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Noble.
Hi, how are you? It was a great talk. Yeah, it was a great talk. Oh, here, let me, I'm okay. Yeah, I think
There you are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was good. And I'm really glad that there'll be a recording available. I'd like to listen to Ray's, parts of Ray's talk again. It's very, very interesting.
And people who aren't able to get through the technology. I've been double checking. My Facebook page happens to be a Ray McGovern fan page, basically. So people who weren't able to get in are saying, will there be a recording? And I said, depends on Charlie. But
Charlie and Dean. Tell them to go to that YouTube, Community Church of Boston official.
That's what I actually
YouTube channel, and it'll be there.
Okay. It wasn't at 11. And several friends have said they tried YouTube, it didn't work, but.
Well, I had trouble. I tried to get on live on YouTube, get the Zoom onto YouTube, and a couple of times it wouldn't let me. It said you are not allowed to live stream on YouTube.
Well,
and then the third time was the charmer, and it let me on. So go figure.
A friend of mine took a screenshot of what Zoom says, and it's Dean's private room. You'll see that in the screenshot. The Zoom originally said that way. Help, let me in.
I don't know why it said that, but
It did, for a while it did. It's okay.
So
we did well.
Yes, we
and
did.
We're going to have him back.
Absolutely.
And you're going to bring Daniel with him.
What a great guy. And can you imagine if we could get Daniel Ellsberg on a Zoom? And we could anybody.
We had Daniel here for the ACLU dinner.
Let's start dreaming. Maybe
and we've had Oliver
Bob
Stone
Dylan
here.
would like to.
Everybody Ray mentioned has been here. Not mentioned was that he's a member of Veterans for Peace. He was infantry, and so those are all Veterans for Peace connections. Oliver being BBAW, of course.
Yes, and I wanted to say hello to David Rold. Dave, can you hear me? David Rold?
I saw his name. There's his
I just unmuted David Rold.
face.
David?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hello, David. Thanks for joining
Hi,
us.
everybody.
All right. And then there's another, that's a phone number. Whoever's phone number is 617-306-5067, we're unmuting you. Would you like to say hello? Nope, maybe that's the FBI. Who didn't identify themselves. Folks, are we all done? Thank you all for being with us, and hope to have you join us next Sunday. Barry Lynn, really engaging speaker, and we were really lucky to get him. The next week after that is Richard Rosen on Earth Day. He's a frequent participant at Community Church, and I don't know much about Richard, but he's a PhD and is constantly in conversation with the folks, the top climate activists who are part of the international panel on climate change, the Nobel Prize winners. It's going to be a really interesting talk. That's April 26th. May 3rd is Judith Woodruff speaking on Labor Day. And that'll be a really interesting program. Also another program in May that will be treasures from the archives of Community Church, like this one that I just showed you from Henry Wallace, and all kinds of other things to talk about during our 100th anniversary. Shall we say goodbye and go have lunch?
Yes.
Thank you all. And thank you, Charlie. Also, thanks to Barry Warner, who is not with us, but has provided invaluable assistance on this Zoom adventure we're on.
Can anyone hear me?
Doing his Julian.
Lenny, yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I just wondered if I don't even know if the microphone works on this. Does it?
Yes, it does. I can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. We had a lot of snow up here. They had 1.5 feet of snow in northern Maine 2 days ago.
Crazy. You got to call Alan Clemens, see if he's unburied yet. He lives up there. All right. I'm going to end the meeting. That's too powerful a thing to have, too much power to have in the hands of one dude who's going to end the meeting. Bye.
Next one by committee.
End the meeting by committee.
I second that.
Move to adjourn.